All right. Hello. And I want to welcome you all back to the HerdCon podcast, PopCast. And I am here today with Associate Professor Hilary Brewster from the Marshall University English Department. Hilary is also the Director of Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies here at Marshall, which is a newer program that we're working on evolving. So, and you know,
Yeah.
hello, Hilary.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, this is my 10th year at Marshall, which came a little bit as a surprise when I thought about time, because I did not think I had been here that long. And I feel very much sometimes like I'm a jack of all trades, as opposed to being, academics have a reputation for being very niche, however you say that word, niche. And I just don't feel like I'm like that. So I teach a ton of courses that are not necessarily related to each other. But I do have a degree in young adult literature. It's through the lens of education, specifically from Ohio State. And one of my specialties is the Hunger Games.
Oh, that's awesome. It is one of my favorite book series. I read it a few years back, and of course, they've done the film adaptations, which has been fun and everything. Tell us a little bit about your work with the Hunger Games so far. What's what's your biggest topic within the Hunger Games that really kind of grabs you?
Okay, so a lot of popular young adult novels get adapted into film. Of course, it is not only a moneymaker, but they become popular, and then there is that sort of natural desire to see things come alive on screen. And one of the really interesting things, I'll try not to make it too jargony, but the narrative tense of the Hunger Games series is rare in literary world. So it is written in what's called the simultaneous present tense, which means that the narrator, Katniss Everdeen, obviously, is experiencing the events as they happen. Whereas most first-person narration, young adult or otherwise, is what's called the retrospective tense, which means that the narrator, which is not a real person, obviously, but the author has written the narrator where they're telling you about events that have already happened, even if it's
much more remembering it.
Yes. And even if it's just like, yesterday I blah, blah, blah. But okay, so there is in the literary theory, narrative theory, there is a whole communication model, blah, 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 blah. We don't have to go into that. But what makes the Hunger Games really interesting is that it is in the simultaneous present tense. And when I point that out to my students, they all kind of look at me because they don't really understand what I'm saying. And then I explain it. And then they're like, oh, yeah, I haven't read too many books like this. And so we talk about what that's like as a reader to read a book where you are literally going along with the narrator. Now, obviously, there are tropes and things that authors use, dream sequences, flashbacks, right, to establish characterization and theme and things like that. And those, of course, still happen in the Hunger Games. But then when you get to film adaptation, it's really hard. First of all, it's hard to film like point of view, like viewership. What's the word for that? Camera angles.
Yeah.
Because it's almost impossible to do that, right? Yeah. Some found footage, like Blair Witch Project, is kind of, over the shoulder point of view type thing. There is another sort of thriller horror movie, where like aliens invaded and it was a camera on the guy's shoulder the whole time, and it was done pretty well, but it's a very rare camera technique especially for the entirety of a film.
It tends to be very it's a little intense.
It's intense, it's jarring, it's very jerky, and also it's a little corny. You know what I mean? In my personal opinion, obviously, which is not to say that directors have not done it successfully. But it's a little weird, in the same way that breaking the fourth wall is now it feels even more and more popular. But once upon a time, that was like, whoa, right? Like breaking the fourth wall. I do not know enough about film history to know like the first film that ever did that or whatever. But breaking the fourth wall is also, it's a technique.
Mhm.
And if you do it too much, it is weird. And if you do it in a way that like disrupts, it's weird. But if you do it effectively, it's really good.
Yeah.
And so when it came time to adapt, first of all, we've all gone to the movie of a book
Mhm.
and come away disappointed.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I don't, that's a universal feeling.
Mhm.
And part of it comes from, oh, well, I pictured that scene going this way, or I thought the character would look like this, or like, and I think especially for really avid readers who are also very spatial people who can sort of imagine. I don't do that very well. When I read, I'm not like imagining like, oh, the characters look like this, whatever. I'm just not good at that. So we've all gone to the film of a book and come away disappointed. And we've all gone and gone, oh, that's great. And the history of adaptation theory, once upon a time, it was focused on fidelity. How faithful to the source text is this film?
Yeah.
And that mostly is about plot and character.
Mhm.
Right. And then the adaptation theorists moved toward a model that took into account the fact that making a film and writing a book are two different artistic mediums.
Very much.
I mean, they're literally not the same thing. In the same way that being a sculptor and being an oil painter are not the same thing.
Yeah.
And so why are we evaluating art form B, even if it's literally the same, from the same source text? Why are we evaluating it in terms of its source? And so adaptation theory moved away from the fidelity model. And so now, to me, when I watch the adaptation of anything, I am thinking to myself, are the techniques that a filmmaker has at his or her discretion in order to create a story, even if it's not an original story, are they keeping in line with the sort of like ethical and moral point of the story itself? Yeah. And actually, one of my friends from graduate school, Matthew Bolton, has lots of publications out about this. He does really good work. And so my one set of students, because I teach education classes as well, and my students tease me all semester because I hate the newest adaptation of The Great Gatsby, the Baz Luhrmann one. I hate it. Not because of anything. I love The Great Gatsby. I taught high school. I could probably quote you The Great Gatsby from until the day I die. But the Baz Luhrmann version, the changes that he makes, some of them, not because they're changes, but because of what they do to the character and the theme and the motif. And so I just talk about how much I hate that movie during this class because we talk about Gatsby a lot. So when it came time to adapting the Hunger Games, they were faced with sort of a triple conundrum, because first you're taking a book to a movie, and then you're taking a book that is meant to be simultaneous, and unless you're going to put it over Katniss's, her shoulder the whole time, how are you going to do that? And the end result is they did not do that. Yeah. Not even close. And so you automatically, you have to be thinking about the film in a different way. And the first film, the director changed after the first one. And I think you can tell, in terms of the focus and the shots and everything like that. But I think the first one does the best job of adapting the source material. Okay. I really do. Yeah, God, that was long-winded. My God.
Oh, that's okay. Blech. That's okay. Yeah, I do think the first one was really well done overall. You did get that good sense of, okay, the character's background, the environment they're coming up in, the situation as it's building. You do kind of, I think it expresses it very well. The relationships with the characters are nice and solid. So yeah. And I think the second one did feel a little more forced in a lot of ways.
And they changed directors.
Yeah, changed directors. So you do have that little that's always a kind of iffy thing.
I agree. Yeah. And then the third book was split into two films, which at first I was angry about, because I was like, oh, they're just trying to get more of my money, you know?
Oh yeah.
But in the end, I actually like that they split it.
Mm-hmm.
But the fourth one, so in my personal opinion, Mockingjay does not feel, which is the third for those listening,
Mm-hmm.
Mockingjay is the third installment of the trilogy of the books and was turned into the third and fourth movies. Mockingjay is a war novel.
Yes. Yes.
And when I remember, you know, I don't think I was quite in line at the bookstore at midnight to get it, you know, but pretty close. And I read it that day and I was very disappointed.
Okay.
At my first, I remember feeling disappointed at my first read of Mockingjay.
Okay.
Because it is not like your traditional young adult dystopian sort of resolution to a trilogy. And upon second, and in fact, I think I didn't read it again for ages because I was so disappointed. And then I read it again. And of course, by then, you know, you get think pieces on it and, you know, whatever, interviews and whatever. And once I realized, oh, she's written a war novel for teenagers, my Mockingjay might be well, I don't, it's so hard to pick. I don't have to pick which one is my favorite. I like them all for different reasons.
Yeah.
But the problem with adapting Mockingjay into the films is that it's very hard to convey Katniss's and everyone's PTSD.
Yes.
She has essentially served in 2 battles, right? She has fought in 2 wars by Mockingjay. And they turned it, especially the 4th one, which I like as a movie, I like it. But it's an action movie.
Yeah.
Right? And it has every element of an action movie. And the changes that they make to the film from the book are to make it into an action movie. And that is not, it's not a bad or a good thing, but I think they, in the 3rd one especially, they stray away from sort of what I feel like Collins was trying to get at, which is war is hell.
Yeah.
It's hell on people who have served it. It's hell on the people that they love. It is hell on a community. It is hell on everybody. And that is very apparent in the book, which a lot of people didn't like. I think for the same reason that I initially didn't like it, because they feel like Katniss just whines all the time. She's a 17-year-old girl who has fought in 2 wars.
Like, well, I mean, even when you look at Haymitch, that character, I mean,
walking
so
PTSD
at times, but he is definitely, he's someone who has survived some very harsh realities, and it's not something that you just recover from. It's, you don't jump back.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
having never served.
Yeah.
I can, everything we know that is true. So I think that, and then I also think, so adapting the first book with its challenges about the narration is one thing, but adapting a sequel is its own really interesting situation, right? Because on one hand, you are adapting for the readerly audience. And on the other hand, you have to make the second film for people who only saw the first film and haven't read any of the books. And then the 3rd movie for the same plus one, and for the 4th movie for the same plus another one. And so it was really interesting to sort of watch all that play out. And then I think something like that, I know Game of Thrones fandom folks have are their own special breed of people, but all 3 books were out before the first movie got made.
Yes.
But when there is that sort of overlap of timing where the movies are starting to get adapted before the books are finished being written, obviously, then that's even a weirder situation of like, well, is she really just writing this book because she knows it's going to be a television show, or he or whoever? And so that didn't happen with the Hunger Games. But I think the whole enterprise, especially then when you're also talking about a franchise aimed at teenagers, right? And so we have to, right, all of this, the publishing industry of the books and the movie industry, their primary goal is to make money.
Oh yeah.
Right.
They love their money.
They love their money, and that's fine or whatever, but so the movie industry, the film, the directors, and the Lionsgate, I think, is the producer of all 4, if I'm not mistaken, was also thinking, all right, how are we going to get these teenagers to come ask their parents to come for $10 to come see this movie or whatever it costs to see it then. And so you have to take rating into account. And that involves its own, violence levels and how many times can you say the F word, right? Like, I love watching TV and when something is PG-13 and they use their one F word and you're like, there it is. That's the moment that they chose to use the F word. And it can't be a verb. So it just the whole enterprise, I think, is really fascinating.
Oh yeah.
And I love it, and I love teaching it. I've taught a class on the Hunger Games a couple of times, twice as a 400 level special topics class in the English department, and then once this past summer I taught it online as a 200 level English class, which is very different than a 400 level English class. And I was inspired to do that because so many of the headlines about the Russian invasion of Ukraine literally were plot points of Mockingjay. Yeah. And I thought to myself, I have to bring back teaching this book somehow. And so it was in my online class, and their final project was to pick a theme from the trilogy and tie it into current events.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of them chose to tie, and I gave suggestions of ways to do that, but a lot of them chose to do like a compare contrast of Ukraine and District 12 and District 13 and all that kind of stuff. Spoilers, there's District 13. We're past the point of spoilers with the Hunger Games.
Oh yeah, I would hope. If you haven't read it or seen it yet, I mean, we're sorry, but
yeah. And a lot of my students, and I also think from a pedagogical standpoint that, and this is kind of what I wrote my dissertation about, but I'll de-jargon. If you were trying to get a 200 level English student, right? So not a 400, we're not talking about them, but a student who is taking English 200 because it checks off like 3 requirements for their little doodad to graduate. You want them to, I love narrative. I'm an English professor. Like, obviously I love the English stuff, but I think the Hunger Games does a really good job of being an accessible text, partially because it's for young adults, that you can then use to, like, this is how an author develops a theme over time. This is how most of them had never heard of simultaneous present tense or thought about it in that way, right? This is how we think about genre, right? There are expectations for how a dystopian is going to go. Yeah. And I think people didn't like Mockingjay at first because it defied some of those expectations. So I like, especially at like the general ed level of class, I would not hand a 200 level English student like Jane Austen or Moby Dick. Okay. Doesn't mean other people shouldn't. Up to you. Do whatever you want in the classroom. But if you're trying to get somebody who is a business major, an engineering major, a chemistry major, whatever, to think more deeply about the narratives they interact with, whether that's book or movie or film or television or comedy or whatever, I think that from a pedagogical standpoint, it's easier to do that if they're doing it with a text that is not inherently difficult for them.
Oh yeah.
And so that is another reason why I like to teach the Hunger Games, because you can, because it's written for teenagers. Yeah. And so a 20-year-old Marshall student is past the audience that it was written for. And so they feel successful when they read it. And you can be like, okay, now let's talk about how fire became a symbol in this, and then she literally catches on fire at the end. Yeah. Like, it's, not that I'm laughing at Katniss's fate. I'm just like, oh my God, really? Like, we didn't see that coming from a mile away. So, yeah.
Very awesome. Now, I know a lot of course, the Hunger Games is kind of set here in Appalachia, which is its own wonderful just topic. What are your thoughts on like the whole idea of District 12 and her, of course, rise, rebellion, and then we've got, of course, our own history of things like Matewan and Blair Mountain and the mine wars and this whole rising up of the working class.
Right. I mean, I
I
love
don't know
it.
how intentional it was, but it was like, oh
Well,
my
I
God,
mean,
it's there.
so what I say to my students is always, if it's in the book, the author meant it.
Mhm.
So it was intentional, right? Now, was it intentional? And I do know, because I teach this class, I have researched quite a bit of, interviews with Suzanne Collins and things like that. But I don't know if I've specifically read anything about why she chose District 12 to be Appalachia. One reason is because Appalachia generally is the marginalized part of the country. So if you're going to write about class uprising, you pick the poor people, I guess, somewhat, right, to some degree.
Okay, yeah.
And what I think is interesting is, and I talk about this with my students as well, for us in Appalachia, and I'm not from here.
Okay.
I'm originally from upstate New York, and then I spent most of my like formative adult years in Philadelphia,
Okay.
and then I did my graduate work in Columbus, Ohio, and then I moved here.
So you're Appalachian adjacent.
I am like, yes. And my hometown is a very small town, very similar to Huntington.
Okay.
So I'm not unfamiliar with what it's like to live in a small town. Even though being there when you're 17 versus being there when you're in your 40s are very different. But so one of the things I talk about with my students is, in Appalachia at Marshall, we offer a program in Appalachian studies. There's Appalachian Lit, there's Appalachian this, and that's great. And 1,000% we should, because I think that regional literature is important to, have students think about, and it is important to a culture. And I think that's great, because most of the pop culture stuff that we are exposed to, New York, Los Angeles, this sitcom's in Chicago, that one's in Detroit. And like every now and then when things are set in Appalachia, it is in a negative light a lot of the time.
Oh yeah.
Right.
Very, very often.
But my question is, I am certainly not the only professor in the last 10 years to teach a class on the Hunger Games.
Oh yeah.
Surely I'm not. But is the professor at another university in New York or in LA, are they highlighting the Appalachianness of District 12?
That's a good question.
In a way that is positive, rather than like, oh, those poor hillbilly type things, right? And so wouldn't it be great if Appalachian literature was offered at UCLA?
Oh yeah.
And maybe it is. I have a feeling it's not. You know what I mean? And so like regionalism, when it comes to literature and film and things like that, I think is this like really weird thing. Because so in the children's literature, young adult literature world, there is a very famous essay by Rudine Sims Bishop called Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. And it is kind of the sort of quintessential, the sliding glass doors got added later, but it is the quintessential sort of essay about what reading should do, especially for young people.
Okay.
And so reading should allow you to look out into a world that is not yours, the window, be able to see yourself reflected in the literature that you read, the mirror. And then the sliding glass door was added later as a way to like bring those two together.
Okay.
And so this concept is mostly derived from the idea that like Black kids in urban areas, or any area, but urban areas, should not just read little like picture books about white kids, right? I mean, that is kind of where it came from. But I think that and then the reverse is also true. But I think that so much of our pop culture, especially visual media like television and movies, they're filmed in the cities that have good tax breaks for the movie company. So there's that. But even the stories that we are told, like this group of friends lives together in an apartment in Los Angeles. This group of friends live together in an apartment in New York. And so we get the same settings over and over and over and over again. And so kids in Appalachia think they know what it's like to be a teenager in LA or Philly or New York or whatever. but the kids in Philly don't know what it's like to be from District 12, so to speak. And so I like that she chose District 12. Appalachia generally as District 12. I hope that it wasn't in some sort of like, oh, these poor people, I'll give them a book, you know. And if there's article or interview out there about where she says why she decided to do it like that, I'd love to be exposed to it. Somebody please send that to me. So, and then of course you have the government control of the coal mines.
Yeah.
And how President Snow literally shuts down the mines as punishment. And so people starve to death and their wages are controlled by the government. And when you try to rebel, that's when Katniss's dad died in a mining accident, and it's alluded in the third book, maybe second, one or the other, that it may have been a purposeful mining accident, right? To kill everybody or to kill like any like sniffing of rebellion, right? Yeah. And but then of course by the epilogue of Mockingjay, which I hate so much, you don't really get a sense that coal miners came back to work in the mines. And that's interesting to me. Now, people came back to rebuild District 12, but she does not really discuss like, and the coal miners went back in the mines. And that's probably for the best, maybe ish.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
In terms of like environmental impact, right? But and so I think that that's an interesting that I had actually not thought about until just now.
Okay. Yeah, well, it is a good question because I mean, it is something you're early on. It's a very big part of the book. You're learning about this background and everything, and you're getting that sense that Katniss comes from a mining community, the dangers of it, and if you're at all familiar with West Virginia history, that really rings really hard home because we're looking at okay, the miners in Matewan and them being essentially owned by the mines. They
company
lived
store,
in the company stores. They lived in company housing. They were paid with company script.
Sure,
it's
yeah,
like,
of course.
Here's your monopoly money.
Right,
You
right.
can only use it here in this game. So I mean, yeah, you get that very, very strong sense of that. And then, like you said, like the epilogue really doesn't give you an idea of where it goes from there, which can be a good thing.
Sure.
Because okay, is that because they were able to pull away from the
industry
and Pan Am, were they able to overcome the role they were given and build on from that? And because it is, like you said, a very first person is happening now, you don't get that future tense of okay, what's going to happen?
Yeah, other than the epilogue,
yeah,
you don't really know what happens to anybody else other than the main characters. But then again, so in the first movie opens with the conversation between Stanley Tucci's character and the new Seneca Crane, the game maker.
Oh yes.
And they're interviewing, what is Stanley Tucci's character's name? Help.
Hold on. I have to think of it.
Nope. Oh my gosh. It's like the third time today that I've lost my mind.
Oh, you're fine because my brain completely spaces out on certain names, and that's why I have
Caesar Flickerman.
There we go.
We did it. I did it. So Caesar Flickerman is, the reality show host, and he's interviewing Seneca Crane, the new game. It's only his third games, and so he's still sort of new to the world or whatever. And he's interviewing him as part of his reality television show about like what the games this year, they're about to start, blah, 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 blah. And his Caesar Flickerman says, he asked him a question, something like, how would you define your style? And before Seneca Crane can answer, we have a cut shot to Prim, Katniss's sister, waking up screaming from a nightmare in bed. So we literally have, what is your style? Screaming in terror, right? And so I think that that's brilliant.
Yeah.
But then the next shots are as Katniss is getting ready to illegally go into the meadow to go hunting with Gale, and it's poverty porn, right? It's grim, it's brown, it's gray in color, which of course stands in contrast to how the Capitol is depicted, which is absurd colors, right? I mean, Effie Trinket just comes in with her pink hair or whatever, and she just looks silly. So we have dirt roads and an old man eating chicken bones and the dogs are eating the scraps and people washing themselves in a bucket. And so, you know, for a dystopian series that is set in like some vague future, are we really telling another Appalachian story about poverty?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean,
And
it's
we
very
are.
much.
And then, you know, Katniss is the hero child of District 12 and leads the rebellion, which is ultimately successful, partially only because of her choice at the end, which I will not spoil in case people have not read it. If you don't know what happens at the very end of Mockingjay, I won't tell you. But I understand like how, you know, District 11 is agriculture, and that's based on the agriculture of the South. And there's lots of thematic ties to America's history with slavery. And Detroit, I mean, obviously these are all sort of fake places, but, you know, what is now Detroit is meant to be like the technology center. And what is sort of the coast is the fishing industry. And so, you know, Suzanne Collins does a great job of sort of like breaking America into its parts and then highlighting the thing from them. But is it furthering the single story of Appalachia that it's poverty-stricken coal miners?
I appreciate that they didn't at least go into the Appalachian. They didn't bring it up as they're all, you know, both poor coal miners, but also opioids and drug use and all this. So they at least did avoid that with the bringing of this whole, and I kind of get the poverty as part of the way they are treating the mine industry in the series, because it's very much we don't really care. We just want our coal. So it does feel very much like they're just kind of, okay, you know, they're coal miners. Of course, they're poor because we don't care.
Right. And then there are a lot of, you know, sort of, so Katniss's mom is sort of an herbalist, right? And part of that is because District 12 has been economically depressed for so long that they don't have actual medicine a lot of the time. I mean, they have some. So, you know, the tradition of sort of like homeopathic and sort of natural remedies and things like that is very Appalachian and then there's a lot of music.
Yes.
Katniss talks all the time about her late dad, you know, having this beautiful voice and singing, and she sings too. And in Mockingjay, she sings that hanging tree song that is haunting. And then the movie adaptation turns it into this like weird anthem and then on top of that, some like club mix DJ remixed it into this like unsa club beat. And you are like, sir, you are missing the point.
Oh no.
Yeah.
I don't think I've heard that one. I'm going to have to look that up.
Oh, it's not good. You will not be happy about yourself when you listen to it. And so, you know, there is that sort of, and again, you know, by the end, the people of District 12 are one of the first districts to join the rebellion, which I think speaks to sort of like the collective feeling of Appalachian identity, which is lovely. Whereas the districts closer to the capital, which have been kept in favor economically by them, are the least likely. And so you know, that could be true as well. But I don't know. I think it's this is all very long-winded to say that if I were teaching at a different university and taught this class, I don't know how much of that would get naturally brought out compared to teaching it here.
Oh yeah.
You know, and isn't that weird and wrong? Maybe that if I was at like Boston University,
I don't know that it's weird or wrong, but I do think it plays into the minds of the people that are your audience. So the audience, of course, and it is true when you're reading a book or watching a film, the audience pull out what is attached to them. And it can be so very interesting because, like I said, I don't know how much of her intention
Mhm.
was with putting, District 12 into Appalachia, because it fits very, very snugly with the Appalachian history and narrative
Mhm.
in a lot of ways. And you do wonder, okay, did she mean for that?
Mhm.
Because
I mean, she definitely
like
did
you
her
said,
research
yeah,
for
yeah.
sure.
And yeah, if you're watching it somewhere else or reading it somewhere else, yeah, you're not going to feel those same connections.
Mhm.
Which, I'd love to talk to people who,
Yeah.
were from other regions and were like, okay, how did you feel about,
Mhm.
your district? How did you feel about as far as the connections
Sure.
to it? And did you feel like it really kind of brought out both the good and bad
Mhm.
necessarily for your area?
Right.
So, but yeah, I always find it fascinating when you get into any kind of literature or film, because it really pulls the audience into it, whether it means to or not.
Mhm.
When there's those little threads
Sure.
that you want to pull at and go, oh,
Yeah.
that's really familiar, or that's very foreign, and I don't
Mhm.
understand it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And another thing that was really interesting about teaching it, especially this summer, I noted, I don't remember thinking about this the last couple of times I taught it, which feels like 1,000 years ago, but it is really interesting to teach, because when I teach the class, I start with the books.
Mhm.
And it is interesting to teach a book to a person who thinks they know the plot from the movie.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that some of my students never read the books and just
Yeah.
wrote about the movies and were smart enough that they got away with it. And like, it is what it is. But I did catch a couple of them, because if you as the professor are familiar enough with
Mhm.
the books versus the movies, or, the specifics of both, you were like, that happened in the movie and not the book.
Oh, yeah.
No points for you. But that was really interesting because, so much of the way we are taught to interact, I don't like the word interact, but talk to engage with literature is to find out what happens.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that. There are
Mhm.
definitely, Dan Brown has made a career out of writing novels
Mhm.
that are just plot, plot,
Plot,
plot,
plot.
plot, plot. And the characters are tropey and they're not very well developed, but darn it all, I am flying through Angels and Demons because I want to know what happens, right? So there's nothing wrong with wanting a plot heavy or being excited about a plot or anything like that. But we are so often taught that, like, well, I know what happens, so why would I read this? And that was true for a lot of my summer students, that they saw the movies when they came out, when they were in middle school or high school. And now they were like, oh, this professor's making me read this, but I know what happens. Like, why am I reading this? But by the end, most of them, at least, either they lied to me or they were genuine, said, like, I was really glad to have had this opportunity to read it because I always wanted to read these and never got around to it because they came out when I was younger and you're not focused on reading then, generally, or not everyone is. Some of us were bookworms even in high school, but or, I loved watching the movie from a more analytical point rather than just, how is this movie? Like, am I going to sit on my couch and eat some popcorn or in the theater and just enjoy it as a thing I'm doing? Or am I going to critique and evaluate and analyze, okay, why was that? Why was it cut like that? How did that scene, what am I noticing about costuming? What am I noticing? And so, right. And so they, unless they were lying, the overwhelming majority of my students at least walked away from class being like, well, I can never watch a movie the same again. And I joke with my women's studies students that, like, this is a class that makes you insufferable. Which probably most of my friends would be like, yeah, Hilary, you're the one that makes everything insufferable. And that's fine. I don't care. But, once you learn how to think about those things, it's hard to turn it off.
Yeah.
And even if you're watching a quote unquote guilty pleasure, which I think is a terrible phrase, it's not that guilty. It's just a pleasure. Like, who cares? it's really hard for me to be like, ooh, all the women characters in this are terrible, and just to let myself enjoy it without critiquing it. And I think that my students will now, if nothing else, be like, oh, if I go to see a movie based on a book, I'm gonna think about it in a new way, even if they don't, in 6 months from taking the class, remember the terminology that I taught them, and that's fine with me.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing though, because I mean, there is so much difference usually between the film and the book, whether it's because they didn't have the same way of getting the right kind of point of view, if it just wasn't possible. And sometimes, you get some really lengthy books out there, of course, we've got The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings.
Can I tell you that I have never read or seen any of those?
Oh, really? Oh, my
I
goodness.
tried to read The Hobbit when I took my very cliche post-college graduation trip to Europe. I brought it as one of the books with me because Kindles were not invented then. Let's just go back in time. So I was like, I'm going to bring long books with me. And I could not I tried The Hobbit. Hard. I couldn't do it. And then
that's the easy one.
Oh God.
It really is. If you try to read them, The Hobbit, that is the YA version. And then
oh God, you're not selling me. I gotta be honest.
And it's like,
and I tried to see, and then I was like, okay, I don't need to read them. I'll just watch the movies. And I went to the Lord of the Rings in the theater and I fell asleep in the chair. Oh, no. I can't do them. I cannot.
Yeah, you're definitely not getting through the extended cut then.
No, and and it's not, I mean, I will say, I've also never seen a single Star Wars movie. And that one, people accuse me of making it part of my personality. And I'm willing to cede that a little bit. Lord of the Rings, I just don't care.
Well, there's definitely, I think, you've got your genres and not everybody's a fantasy and high fantasy.
Yes, but I actually kind of like high fantasy, like a little bit. Yeah. I think I more am a fan of blended fantasy, like Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Complications with the author, of course, but I loved Harry Potter. I flew through Harry. That is what I ended up reading on my college trip. Oh, yeah. I brought the first one, flew through it, bought the second one in England, bought the third one in France, bought the fourth one in Italy. Or no, actually, I bought the fourth one in Switzerland. I remember distinctly. And then had to wait, because I started reading them when the first three were already out. And so that feels so good because you're like, ooh, the next one, it's like binging a show that all the seasons are done, right? And then I had to wait for 5, 6, and 7. But and I liked is a strong word. I watched all of Game of Thrones, and I was pretty into it. And, and I sort of appreciated sort of the commentary they were making about religion and place and family, whatever. But I couldn't do the Lord of the Rings.
Well, I feel like Tolkien is very much like reading, and this is going to sound weird, but it's like reading the first book or like the first part of Genesis.
Yeah, just families and places and names and beget. Yeah.
And it's like, oh dear God, help me. I will not remember this when I'm somewhere over here. And and that's if I can get to past this, anywhere past this, because it's too descriptive. It's kind of like, it's like every now and then when you're reading Stephen King, because he gets a little wordy like that sometimes. And it just,
I'm sure that's true.
It's like, dude, why?
Well,
why did we have to go into this much description?
Well, the earlier ones was when he was still drinking.
Well, yeah.
So that could explain some of the wordiness of Stephen King. Is that man wrote most of his books drunker than hell.
Yeah. It makes for some interesting stories, I guess.
I know that we're in spooky season right now, but horror is not my genre either. I can't.
Horror is my genre.
Yeah.
Love it. And the more supernatural, the more interesting. Because like I love Rose Madder from Stephen King. Which is very different from, say, like the Dark Tower.
Sure.
Because it's a what would you call it? It is mostly a abuse survival story, and it's for the most part, it's just this woman literally trying to get away from an abusive situation.
Oy.
And it's very well done.
Okay.
Just very interesting. And but that is part of the horror.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
trying to escape
Sure.
from that kind of situation, and how difficult it is because the main character's abuser is someone of authority, which makes it that much harder, of
Sure.
course. So yeah, it was one of my favorite
Okay.
because of that. But yeah, I can read horror just about all the time, but it tends to be the crazy horror,
Yeah.
like Lovecraft and what is it, August the Derelith? Can't remember it.
I can't.
But yeah,
Yeah.
the mythosy,
Okay.
Lovecraftian horror type things.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're weird.
And like, I mean, I've seen, I don't read it, but I've definitely, although as a kid, who didn't read Goosebumps, who didn't read
yeah.
I loved Christopher Pike as a kid. Are you kidding
yeah.
me? Oh, those were like pretty,
They were good.
for like the late 80s.
Yeah.
They were pretty like, what were any of us doing reading Christopher Pike when we were 10? I'm not sure that was a great parenting choice, but that's fine.
That's all right. That's when I got into like sci-fi too. So,
okay.
And there's a lot of that probably was not teen, preteen friendly, but it was good.
And you know, I've seen a bunch of the sort of more mainstream horror movies. I would say mostly as a result of my dating history. But like last week I watched Insidious.
Oh, okay.
And I called every plot point.
Oh, yeah.
You know what I mean? And so at some point, especially if you are a person whose career, so to speak, is about literary tropes and narrative moves or whatever. Like, is anything fun anymore? I mean, and that's not true because I really do. I love television. I do love television. And then of course, you know, the twist ending becomes its own trope, right? How many times is M. Night Shyamalan going to twist an ending? Ooh, he was dead the whole time, you know, whatever. And now that becomes your own thing. And so, you know, I will watch it. I don't like watching it at night.
Oh yeah.
Or if I'm going to like, you know, be in the house by myself for a couple hours and I'll like make sure to extra lock all my doors afterwards. I just get too jumpy.
Oh yeah. Well, it's the whole point of it is to kind of activate that flight or fright or your anxiety level. And
I'm already an anxious person. Like I don't need to.
Yeah, I have to be careful.
Yeah.
I can't do too much of it, but yeah, it's still one of my favorite things to go through.
I mean, it's one of the only movie genres still being released in the theater.
Oh yeah.
Right. I mean, a lot of things these days, especially post-COVID, everything's just getting sent direct, and it makes it cheap. I assume it makes it cheaper for the production companies, but horror movies are getting sent to the theater still, and they have a following, and obviously they're doing well. I remember my sophomore year of college, Urban Legend came out.
Oh yeah.
And I went to go see that with a whole bunch of my friends. And that night in particular, my roommate had written a note on the door because we didn't have phones back then, right?
Yeah.
Because that is when I was in college. And she said, staying at boyfriend's, forgot my key. Please keep door unlocked. So after I saw Urban Legends, I had to sleep with my dorm, and it was a dorm room in a suburban college campus that you had to use a card to swipe into the building at all. And I had to sleep with my door unlocked, and I slept zero.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Slept zero.
Yeah, I don't blame you. I would have been freaked out. I'd be like,
so I
you're just gonna have to knock when you get here because
I can't do it. But some of them are very well done.
Oh yeah.
You know, Jordan Peele is making some great, very sort of like socially aware horror movies. Get Out was fantastic. Yeah. Saw that in the theater.
What was the one with the horse farm?
Oh, the most recent one. Nope.
That one was
I loved it.
Really well done.
But,
I loved it.
And it is horror, but to me, that's, you know, like name your favorite horror movie. I'm not sure that would be what people would think of initially. But I think Jordan Peele is doing really marvelous things with his filmmaking.
And he's getting into that commentary that gets ignored a lot of times. I mean, because there's always the running joke of, you know, okay, we have the token person of color in the story, and in so much horror, that's the first person who dies. And it's like, no. I mean, give me something better. And I love Nope. I love that the cast was primarily people of color. And I love that, you know, it's just I don't know, the characters were well developed, I felt.
Yep. Acting was fantastic.
It was fantastic. I loved
the woman
brother.
lead. Oh my God. I thought she was just that actor.
She was
Give
a
her
hoot.
every word. I don't even know. Just given. Yeah.
I love that she was this very bright and just, I'm up.
Mhm.
I'm, come on, I gotta get this done. I gotta get this
Yeah,
done.
yeah.
It's kind of character.
Yeah.
And I love the brother because he was so relaxed the whole time.
Mhm.
I mean, he just seemed to me, that's very what I grew up with, a farm.
Okay.
It's like, that's the farm,
Just-
mentality.
Okay.
It's like, yeah, he's very at home. He's doing his job. He's very,
Yeah.
just like old farmers, period.
Yeah.
Just, he's there. It was awesome.
And I mean, I do like her in this. Well, I don't know, some parts of her. I like that historically it is social commentary,
Mhm.
right? What is the world afraid of and how can we make that into the big bad?
Oh, yeah.
Right. And I read a really fascinating article. I can't cite it or quote it, but the basic premise was, depending on which political party is in power, vampires or zombies become more popular.
Oh, yeah. I can see that.
Based on sort of the mechanism of zombification versus vampirism, right? And attacking and turning you into something versus being sort of a Walking Dead follower. And which one is more popular switches off with the political party zeitgeist of the time. And I read that article and I was like, holy F, are you kidding me? That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And then
you're going to love it then, because on the 24th, we've got Dr. Squire and Dr. Lumpkin and
yes,
RGA, Megan Sexton Harness, and we're going to be watching the 1968 Night of the Living Dead.
Okay, I watched that at a sleepover when I was 11, probably to my detriment.
But we're going to talk about zombies in movies and all this kind of stuff.
Sure, and I love how there are tropes, there are ways that these particular monsters are how they, and they're fictional.
Yeah,
they're not. Now Twilight. Let's not talk about it. But, so much of one of the many reasons that lots of people hate on Twilight, myself included, is because she changed what a vampire is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Right. And,
very much so.
And what's interesting is that, like, on one hand, how dare you change what a vampire is? Because we have established literary lore about what a vampire is and does and cannot be and blah, blah, blah. And then on the other hand, are we really going to get mad that this lady changed? Now, there's things to hate about Twilight. I could talk forever. But, the fact that changing a fictional character, it almost feels like, well, I'm mad that Ariel's black from Little Mermaid now.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so it's
gatekeeping.
interesting that we have these established cultural norms about vampires, werewolves, zombies, this, that, the other thing, and who created that and how it came to be, and the propagation of those sort of norms is fascinating from a cultural standpoint.
Oh, yeah. It goes back to the idea of the gatekeeping.
Yeah.
And it's odd, but yeah, it's kind of like a fandom that people have
Sure.
created culturally over time. This is what a vampire is. This is what a werewolf is. And you can't, switch these things around, because if you do,
vampires don't sparkle.
It's like, oh my God,
lady.
How can you do that to
my
that's my fandom.
Right.
That's my character. That's what I know, or it's what I'm familiar with.
Sure.
And yeah, it is kind of interesting when you see people react like that, because, there's in science fiction, we've got space zombies, space vampires. I mean, if you want to get into like the werewolf trope, I mean, you can go into, what is it? We've got American Werewolf in London. Then you've got the idea of the universal soldier being used with, what is it called? It's a British horror film about werewolves, and I can't think of it off the top of my head. It was an amazing film, but at the same time, it was very much, people could get mad because it was this military program that created them. But yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
But they get mad. It's like, come on, guys.
I know. And it's just interesting because I don't want to be one of those people who gets mad when, like, you change the whatever of whatever. But yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. And I just had my women's studies students read this chapter from a really fabulous book, if you haven't read it, called Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers.
Ooh, Okay.
And it is an analysis of the female monstrosity in horror.
Ooh.
And they all loved the chapter. It was sort of the introduction to the book.
Okay.
But it's sort of like an academic light book. I think the author, I'd have to really triple check all this information, but I think the author is some kind of academic, but this is written for, a broader audience.
Okay.
And it is about how elements of the female body, if not literally the female body, are used as monstrosity.
Oh, yeah.
And whether it's birth
Hmm.
or menstruation or, sort of just mostly the reproductive system, but puberty as a whole and just, or, just the way that women are depicted in horror films and or true crime and or all of it, really just stems from this sort of fear of female power. And then we fictionalize it to make it like, no, I'm not scared of actual women, but here is a woman I am scared of, but she's really just a stand-in for like the fears of the patriarchy,
Oh, yeah.
And it's really, I highly recommend, if you are into horror, I highly
definitely
recommend the
will
book.
look this up.
Dead Blondes and Bad Mothers.
Bad Mothers. Okay.
Mhm.
I will definitely look that up because I find it fascinating. I actually, I like looking at things like especially short horror films, things like that, because you get so much amazing variety when you tell people, okay, you've got 5 to 10 minutes
Mhm.
and you've got to tell that story. And I mean, it's fun for all genres, but horror is a very interesting one to
Mhm.
see where people go. And yeah, sometimes seeing where they take the female character
Mhm.
can be really eye-opening and frightening.
Sure.
Like, really?
Yeah.
That's where we're
I
gonna
mean,
go
we're
with
still
this?
in the world of Final Girl being a thing, right?
Oh, yeah.
Like
Final Girl is very much still a thing.
still a thing. How is that still a thing? Like it is 2022. Why
Yeah.
are we still, working with this trope?
Oh,
And
yeah.
it just, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know why that's the trope. I don't know why that's the thing that people wanna kinda hold on to at the moment. I mean, yeah, I like seeing, the heroine,
Sure.
but at the same time, is it really is
Does
she
she
a
need to be a
hero?
virgin?
Yeah, or yeah, does she need to be a virgin? Does she need to be, I don't know if you've ever, heard of Cabin in the Woods?
Oh, loved that because
Oh,
it was a
I
movie
love
about
it.
the tropes of horror movies.
Yes.
And it was great.
It was so brilliant.
I did like that. Maybe I
And
like horror more than I think. I'm having this realization that perhaps I
Well,
do like it.
there's certain horror that is you've got the grotesque
Mhm.
that's all it is.
Yeah, like the
It's
torture
jump
porn.
scares and
Saw and
blood everywhere.
Saw and
Yeah.
Hostel, like I'm not interested.
Saw,
No,
Hostel,
thank you.
very yeah.
No.
And then you have the psychological
Mhm.
horror. Session 9 was one of my
Okay.
favorites. And it's set with a group of people going in to remove asbestos from an old psychiatric facility.
Ugh.
And
Ugh.
it's so weird because you have this ongoing kind of people are finding, of course, the leftovers from this facility. It's been closed for years, and they're reading things and listening to things, and you get that kind of you feel like maybe there's spookiness going on,
Mhm.
but at the same time, you know, you don't know what's going on. There's very much
Hmm.
this psychological aspect that kind of keeps you guessing the whole
Okay.
time.
All right.
And it's not until the end where you really know what has happened, and it
Okay.
gets really it's like, "Holy crap."
Okay. All right.
So, yeah,
All
I
right.
really
Session 9.
suggest that one.
Okay.
If you want, I can bring it. I've got it on DVD, so, yeah. I am a collector of horror.
Okay.
I can't help it.
Yeah. All right.
It's one of my weaknesses.
Sure.
So
And I
Yeah.
was a huge Buffy fan.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I've only watched it once, which
Mhm.
going back to our conversation about gatekeeping and fandom, it sometimes feels like if you've only watched something once, like you're not a real fan or whatever. But I loved Buffy. Are you
Oh,
kidding?
it
I
was so much
loved
fun.
it. It was so fun. And I loved that, as the series progressed, the big bad got like more and more amorphous in its existence, and it just kind of came like the world is the big bad, right? And we need to bond together as friends and whatever. And that was ultimately like kind of what it was about. So, but yeah, the women thing is always interesting. And of course we are doing this interview on the final Halloween comes out this Friday.
I know. I'm excited about that one.
I mean, I'm gonna watch it.
Oh yeah.
I'm having this idea that maybe I do like horror movies, but so Jamie Lee Curtis as sort of this pop culture icon throughout the years, and seeing the resurgence of the fandom of that franchise has it was only until like last year, which I could even like tell Freddie and Jason and whoever else, Mike Myers, apart. I was like, which one is this? I don't know what's happening. So that probably does not speak too highly to a lot of your listeners, but
you're fine.
Now I sort of mostly know them, the difference between them. I would, if I took a test on it, I would pass.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
Well, but we don't do tests. So you're good.
Me neither. I don't do tests either. But anyway, we started talking about the Hunger Games.
Conversation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Conversations are much more better than tests.
And that's why I think, so to tie it back to the Hunger Games very loosely, I like dystopian as a genre more so than the high fantasy or the sci-fi is okay too, but because I really like seeing how an author treats like social problems. And I'm getting ready actually to write an essay for a journal about Unwind by Neil Shusterman.
Oh yes.
Do you know that?
I haven't read that one yet, but it's on my list of I need to read this one and this one.
Sure. The ever-growing list. Yeah.
It gets terrible.
Always. It's almost like college professors have no time to read. And so I like dystopian because I like that cultural commentary. And I think that compared to others of the young adult dystopian genre, I think the Hunger Games, first of all, it's more than one sort of commentary. It's talking about class, it's talking about race, it's talking about gender, it's talking about government control and economics and authoritarianism and geography and environmentalism. And I mean, she manages to blend a lot with youth culture, of course, because it's young adult. Now, she did get, for people who might not know, she did get accused of plagiarism.
Okay.
Because it is very similar to the Japanese film Battle Royale. And people accused her of just having watched that and then said, I'll make this in America, and like writing a book. She completely denies it.
Having seen Battle Royale and read the books and seen the films, I mean, I get the basic idea, maybe, but I mean, she has so much more story behind it. I mean, you have background. There is not background in Battle Royale.
No, none. It is just violent from start to finish.
Start to finish. You start out in the game.
Yes.
So it wasn't, there isn't that idea of tributes and being selected or being able to volunteer.
Right. And that she was inspired by the Greek myth of Theseus, where every year as punishment, 7 boys and 7 girls are sent into the labyrinth to battle the Minotaur. So she did draw from that. She also drew from Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. Okay. Yeah. Which is a short story that people tend to read in like middle school or high school English, and the English teacher of the day is like, ooh, I love this moment, because you watch all their heads explode and it's great. So I mean, but intertextuality is a thing, right? No literary, whether it's a movie or a television show or a book or a comic or whatever, no thing exists in the vacuum. Oh yeah. The author and the director and the producers and the makers and the writers are drawing from all the other stuff that they've ever watched or seen.
Even if they're not conscious
of it. And some things, of course, have more cultural like staying power than other things. But then also at some point, all stories are the same. Yeah. To some degree.
Yeah. We tend to have, like you said, the tropes of different things we repeat. And it's whether it's, looking back at like Greek and Roman theology and you're coming forward. Yeah, we have a lot of, here's the trickster. That is so universal. We can't help it. But we bring it back up.
Yeah. And what becomes the problem is when so for example, there's like a great, I can't remember the producer, it's on YouTube, but the tropes that women tend to play in movies are all negative tropes, right? You're the old crone, or you're the angry feminist, or the crazy ex-girlfriend. And so the tropes become the problem when they are not allowing characters and human beings who then either act as those characters or whatever to be like fully fleshed out human beings, and they are only a trope. And that has been the problem for a long time with people of color in film, right? They exist solely as the sidekick to help the white character's narrative, or, you know, tropes are universal. I mean, Joseph Campbell would argue anyway, and I'm not sure how I feel necessarily about endorsing Joseph Campbell, but, you know, there are only so many narratives, and it's the character, you know, and so the problematic tropes, and that's what a lot of people liked about the Hunger Games at first, is that Katniss was kind of the first of those like young adult, strong female whatevers. And then people got mad that, of course, there was a love triangle, or I read a really compelling article once that what we call a love triangle is actually usually just a love hinge, because that third line is usually not connected. Unless the character is queer, and then it becomes an actual triangle. If a girl loves the boy who loves the boy who loves the girl, like, then that's a real triangle. So, you know, the Peeta versus Gale, like, who's she gonna pick and why, and like, how does Suzanne Collins write herself out of that, which I think she does. My friends tease me that I was Team Gale the whole time. I just was. But what I am is team a 17-year-old narrator doesn't have to pick her life partner.
Amen.
That is what team I'm on, you know, and I hate epilogues. I hated the epilogue in Harry Potter. I hated the epilogue in Hunger Games. I understand that narrative drive for closure. But like, oh my God, can we just stop her? Like, narratives have to end. They are fictional. They end. Like, just move on. Like, I'm not sitting around wondering what Katniss is doing.
To be able to have I guess, as the reader, that ability to, that's not what I would have done. So, you know, I've got my own epilogue based on, you know, my, you know, reaction to the material. That you don't have to give me that afterwards.
I know. And I, you know, at least from the Hunger Games, the perspective of the narrative of the Hunger Games, the epilogue, it counteracts a lot of what Katniss had said throughout the entire series, which demonstrates that Panem has never gone back to how it was under Snow. And so from a narrative point of view, to be like, look, we actually changed society. Great. But like, I'm really mad. But like, my God, did she have to get married and have babies with Peeta? Like, do I care enough? I don't care enough. I just don't care enough. I don't think it's necessary. I think there's other ways to.
Whole PTSD is like, you know.
Yeah, are they just trauma bonded? Right. Right. Yes.
Is it trauma bonding, or is it something, you know, they really wanted versus, okay, we're just kind of stuck together at this point?
And I just think that there would have, if a male had been the narrator of the Hunger Games, would the epilogue exist in the same way? And I would argue probably not. You know, and so if Suzanne Collins's point of the epilogue was to show that, like, X number of years after the big revolution of Mockingjay, Panem has never gone back, and now everybody feels safe and happy and secure and whatever, there are ways to do that without having this scene in the freaking meadow where you're like, you know, rocking your second baby with Peeta. Like, I can
see that because I mean, I would have been more interested in less about what Katniss necessarily was doing, but just more of, okay, you know, who did come to power, or what filled that vacuum, because that is what happens. You know, you remove the big bad, there's always something that pulls right back into that space.
And now we have this like weird false utopia, and like, and you know, there's a section in Mockingjay where they talk about like, well, you know, what is the government going to be after now that Snow's been captured and whatever. And somebody, I think it's Haymitch, but I can't recall. It's either Haymitch or Plutarch, says, you know, like, well, we'll do it like we used to do it, where we vote for people and blah, 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 and like whatever. And you're like, all right, there's a little nudge to America, you know, but You know, is that really working out for us currently right now? I'm not sure. I'm not sure that's going so great. I mean, I'm obviously pro democracy, but like it has been weird the last couple of years. So there's that, you know. I don't know. Yeah. So anyway, you should read Unwind though.
I definitely will.
Um,
There's several. I love YA fiction. I loved Susan Pfeiffer's The World or This World We Live In.
Oh, I don't think I know that one. Okay.
Is brilliant.
Okay.
Meteor hits the moon and moves it closer to the
Yes.
Earth.
Yes. Okay. I have read that one. Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely brilliant. I love that it was a series that took each book from a different person's perspective.
I have not read more than just the first one.
You
Okay.
should, you
Okay.
should, because
right.
you know, of course, the first one we've got the one kind of small town America.
Mhm.
The second one, I want to say the main character and their family are in like big city, urban. If they're in a big apartment building, trying to deal with all this chaos.
Okay.
And it's happening, I guess, technically simultaneously. So the first and second books are happening at the same time.
Cool. That's very
So
cool.
it's very
Awesome.
good. I want to say there was 3 total.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's
consider it.
Unwind is a trilogy, and I
Okay.
admit that I have not read the second 2. But the first one, I am writing a scathing article about how it treats the topic of reproductive justice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's what it's about.
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Because I've been curious about
With all
that
the
one
free time we
because
have,
of
I'm just
that.
gonna
I
read all these
know.
books.
I know. Was the Uglies?
Uglies, yep.
That was a lot
Is
of
about
fun. It was
sort of like very
interesting.
like that Twilight Zone episode where like I want to be pretty, and then it turns out right that she's pretty. Right,
Are
yeah.
you really sure you want to be pretty?
Yeah.
So yeah, that one was really good.
Divergent,
Oh,
I
yes.
did not like.
Really?
I liked the sort of like basic setup. I thought the author wrote herself into a hole
Okay.
and could not figure out how to write herself out.
That does happen.
It does. I mean, I don't know. I'm not a fiction writer. I have like 2 novel ideas that I know I will never write them because I just can't do it. I don't know. I have like the opening sentence. And then that's all I have. I have the opening sentence and the basic structure and the basic plot of
do it as a podcast, storytell it.
Oh God, I don't know if I can do that.
It could be a lot of fun. I mean, then of course, you know, you can always easily go back and retcon if you need to.
I also have an idea for a 90s country jukebox musical.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Ooh.
That
I like musicals. They're fun.
Yeah. You would have loved the musical I was most recently in called Return to the Forbidden Planet.
Oh, you were in that?
Yeah.
I wanted to see
that. It was really fun. Yeah.
Okay.
Sci-fi, Shakespeare all together in one thing. Yeah, it was awesome.
That is too awesome.
Yeah.
That's right up my alley. Bring it all together. This is why I like Revo the Genetic Opera, because it's horror, sci-fi, and a musical.
I did see Evil Dead. I did see Evil Dead the musical and did not sit in the front row where you had to wear a tarp. But
that's probably good.
Yeah, I was not interested.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to go wrap us up.
Sounds great.
I know you've got to teach.
I do. I have to teach in 20 minutes.
Everybody, thank you, of course, for joining us for the HerdCon PopCast. I am, of course, your host, Michelle Alford, and this is Professor Hilary Brewster. And we have loved having you here. And I feel like giving us a holler, drop us an email at herdcon@marshall.edu, and we'll get back to you. Have fun.
Thank you so much for having me. Bye.